Hey, kiddo, do you want to learn something about geopolitics?
Alright, Jake Pollers and Low Gangsters, welcome to YouTube's favorite show, Geopolitical Shenanigans. So, today's question is space the final frontier of war? Let's find out. Roll the video. So, space is a warfighting domain. It's a mantra that United States officials have been stating ever since the Chinese blew up their own weather satellite during an anti-satellite missile test in 2007. 11 years on, it's a phrase that the United States President Donald Trump repeated in March in making of his case for the creation of a space force. Although there is a growing awareness of the militarization of space and that the area around Earth is indeed a potential theater of war, the Space Force debate remains a predominantly bureaucratic and organizational one. But while enhanced defense in space is important, it alone will not solve the root danger of the growing risk of an extraterrestrial war among terrestrial powers. So beyond being just the final frontier, space is also the ultimate high ground. It not only provides the best possible vantage point to surveil activity on Earth, it also greatly facilitates navigation, communication, targeting, and command and control. For the past 70 years, the United States military has leaned heavily on space as a force multiplier, integrating it as a critical component of its joint warfighting capabilities, thanks to technological advances in sensor and satellites. Today, the US space infrastructure is so vital for the country's military operations that it has become particularly indispensable. But this reliance on space has also become a vulnerability, a dynamic that has not escaped the attention of competitors and adversaries such as China and Russia, which have also bolstered their own space capabilities over the past 2 decades. Driven by these trends, the US military has focused on improving its defenses in space so it can better defend against and counter an attack on its space assets. In short, the United States, along with its adversaries, now view space as a warfighting domain similar to land, air, and sea domains. As US officials weighed the merits of creating a space force independent of the Air Force, questions regarding costs. It might cost, by the way, more than $10 billion just to establish the service. Congressional oversight and organizational inertia ensure that the process will remain slow and subject to much discussion. What is clear, however, is that the country's leaders will devote more attention to space in the years to come. At present, the United States relies on 10 unified commands with distinct geographic and functional areas of responsibility that are not directly tied to any service for the country's joint warfighting needs. To that end, authorities would likely create a unified command, similar to the United States Strategic Command that deals with nuclear deterrence, for example, to focus solely on space before considering the formation of standalone Space Force. So whatever organization ends up taking the lead in space, the United States will significantly increase its attention and funding for the national security mission in space. Beyond the use of space for navigation, communication, command and control, and surveillance, the country is also assuming the mission to deter and even fight a war in space. Such a task requires the country to track more foreign satellites, defend its own satellites from an attack, counter with its own attacks if necessary, and even take advantage of space perch as ultimate high ground, potentially to deploy ballistic missile defenses. In fact, the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act requires the United States military to not only begin work on developing new warning satellites to spot ballistic missiles, but also to develop weapons to intercept the incoming projectiles from space. So the move of the United States to beef up its defenses in space is understandable, given the increasing attention the frontier is receiving from its closest competitors, namely China and Russia. Both countries continue to develop their anti-satellite capabilities, including specialized maneuvering satellites that could be deployed to either conduct repairs or other satellites to interfere with them in nefarious ways. Nevertheless, in the absence of parallel diplomatic efforts with a wider comprehensive strategy to establish international standards for conduct in space, the US move to strengthen its defenses in space could drive the Russians and the Chinese to accelerate their own space militarization efforts. For example, the United States could technically use interceptors, which are essential to a space-based ballistic missile defense system, to destroy other satellites, a fact that is bound to drive Beijing and Moscow to establish their own deterrence in space in the absence of significant transparency or agreements. Now, this brings us to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which is the world's foundational and governing document on space. The agreement bars members, including the US, China, and Russia, from placing nuclear weapons in space and mandates only non-military activities on the moon and other celestial bodies. The pact does not, however, enact restrictions on the placement of conventional weapons in space, and subsequent efforts to impose such limits, including the 2006 Space Preservation Treaty, have failed. Such blanket treaties are unlikely to succeed in the foreseeable future because of their significant limitations, as well as concerns over the ability to verify compliance. The US has especially voiced concern in this regard, repeatedly voting down such initiatives, in addition to noting that the treaty failed to take into account the ability of terrestrial anti-satellite weapons to damage space assets. Nevertheless, the dim prospects of any blanket ban on weapons in space should not limit the effort to engage in transparency and confidence-building measures, which could provide a foundation for more narrow arms control agreements that limit specific aspects of the increasing militarization of space or the scope of such activities over the long term. So, whether or not the US defense in space is best served by the creation of a new service is an organizational question that will undoubtedly attract debate over the next few years, both inside and outside the military. What the question does not address, however, is the need to incorporate a simultaneous and concentrated effort to establish international norms in space to prevent a destabilizing militarized space race. Because any space conflict would produce a large amount of space debris that would ruin the orbiting assets of all countries and therefore devastate the world economy in the process. Basically, the only way to win a war in space is not to fight one. To that end, space should increasingly be seen through a prism akin to that of nuclear deterrence, in which the ultimate aim is to prevent a space war from ever occurring. There is a vital need to build up a defense capacity to deter an attack in space, but this capacity should be tempered by outer space treaties and norms in much the same ways as arms control agreements have played a vital role in restricting nuclear arsenals. The future of the world and its neighborhood depends on it.
Wow. I mean, that was some high quality garbage, man. But do you want to keep up with the latest news in geopolitics? But most importantly, do you want to impress your grandma with geopolitical knowledge? Then make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell button, and any other button. And make sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. And I'll see you guys in the next one.